This week in the Linux world, a lot happened. A kernel on fire, a terminal abandoning the most used platform in the world, a Wayland compositor rewriting the rules of the desktop, and a desktop that died in 2017 that someone decided to rebuild over a weekend. Let's start with the urgent stuff. On May 7, 2026, a Linux kernel vulnerability called Dirty Frag was publicly disclosed. This is not the kind of news you push to the end of the week. It involves two chain CVEs, 2026-43284 and 2026-43500, which together allow a local unprivileged user to obtain root privileges on virtually all major Linux distributions: Ubuntu, Fedora, RHEL, and the rest. The mechanism hits two kernel subsystems: XFRM ESP, which handles IPsec traffic, and RxRPC, used by the AFS distributed file system. In both cases, the problem lies in page cache handling. When certain decryption paths operate on buffers not exclusively owned by the kernel, an unprivileged process can retain a reference to the plaintext data and obtain a write primitive into the page cache. From there, with the right chain, you get root in a single command. A public exploit exists. The full disclosure embargo broke early because an unrelated third party published the code before the original researcher could. The patch for the first CVE landed in the kernel mainline on May 8th. The one for the second was still being finalized at the start of the week. Dirty Frag extends the same bug class as Dirty Pipe and the recent copy fail, but it is more reliable because it does not depend on narrow timing windows. It works regardless of whether the algif aed module is present, which means the mitigation used for copy fail does not protect you here. If you run Linux systems with untrusted local users, blacklist SP4, ESP6, and RxRPC in modprobe, and update your kernel as soon as your distribution ships the patch. I have been saying this for years. Linux is not secure by definition. Security is a process, not a state. And these disclosures are increasing in frequency in a way that is starting to become genuinely concerning. Dirty Pipe, copy fail, Dirty Frag, 3 vulnerabilities from the same class in just a few years. The kernel is an enormous project maintained by thousands of people with different interests and incentives, and the attack surface grows every year. That is not a reason to abandon it, but it is a reason to stop treating Linux as if it were immune by nature, from a system vulnerability to a platform vulnerability. Mitchell Hashimoto, the founder of HashiCorp and creator of the Ghostty terminal, published a long and painful post explaining why he decided to leave GitHub after 18 consecutive years of use. He was user number 1299 on the platform, one of the very first. The reason is not ideological, it is practical. For an entire month, he kept a personal journal, marking an X on every day a GitHub outage had negatively impacted his ability to work. Almost every single day had an X. On the day he wrote the post, GitHub Actions had been down for 2 hours and he could not do any pull request review at all. The final trigger was the major outage of April 27, 2026. Hashimoto is not someone who hates Microsoft on principle. He is someone who built his career on GitHub, who put tens of thousands of hours of work into it, and who ultimately concluded that the platform is no longer reliable for serious work. And he is not the first. The Gentoo project was already evaluating a migration, in that case driven by growing pressure around Copilot adoption. GitHub is still where the majority of the world's code lives, but the monopoly is beginning to crack. This is exactly what happens when you let someone else control your infrastructure. And in this case, that someone is Microsoft. It is not a conspiracy, it is simply the logic of capitalism applied to software. You buy the platform, you integrate it into your products, you use it to push your services. GitHub Actions, Copilot, the container registry, step by step. By the time you realize you are working for them more than the other way around, the dependency is already too deep to escape easily. Less dramatic news, but concretely important for anyone who works in open source. The German Sovereign Tech Agency has opened applications for the Sovereign Tech Standards program. The goal is to pay up to 10 open source maintainers to participate in standardization work at IETF, W3C, and ISO. Not a travel reimbursement, not a symbolic gesture. A fixed monthly salary between 4,800 and 5,200 euros, plus training, mentoring, and coverage of in-person meeting expenses. It is an explicit acknowledgement that standardization work, which underpins the entire global digital infrastructure, cannot continue to run exclusively on voluntary labor. HTTP, TLS, HTML, CSS, WebAssembly. All of this exists because someone dedicated thousands of hours to writing specifications, negotiating text, building consensus. Paying them is not a luxury, it is systemic hygiene. And it touches on something I think about a lot. There is a widespread assumption in our world that open source is a given, that free software falls from the sky, that everything should be immediate and at no cost. That assumption is not just wrong, it is dangerous. The economic model of free software is, alongside security, the central challenge that will determine whether the free software world has a future or not. It is the great problem sitting on the table that nobody wants to seriously solve. Programs like this one are a start, but a start is all they are. Applications close on May 19th. Wait, I'd like to steal 1 minute of your time for a subject that does not concern this video, but one I want to raise awareness about. Systemd. I used Systemd for years. I considered it an acceptable compromise. If Debian, Arch Linux, and the rest of the Linux world had accepted it, then clearly the benefits it brought must have outweighed its compromises. But slowly, things changed. From an init system, Systemd became something more, something that is gradually extending itself deeper into Linux desktops, reaching the point of introducing control mechanisms such as age verification. That is where I stopped. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am not a nostalgic person who believes that everything old is automatically better. I am simply someone who opened his eyes, and I would like you to open yours as well. Your init system is more important than it seems. Choose consciously. Take a look at systemdfree.com and try distributions free from Systemd. There are alternatives, often almost identical to the distros you already use, such as Devuan, which is essentially the same as Debian, or Artix Linux, which is Arch Linux without Systemd, or MX Linux, a user-friendly distribution. It costs nothing to try. They are free not only to download, but in all the ways you do not see. Now we can return to the video. Hyprland grows, and with this release, it grows significantly. The headline change is the move to Lua-based configuration. The old Hyprland format remains supported for now, but the direction is set, and the wiki has already been updated for the new format. With Lua comes something more interesting than just new syntax, a layout API that allows users to define custom window layouts directly in the configuration, applicable per workspace, per monitor, or globally. They function like native Hyprland layouts, but remain entirely under user control. On top of that, this release adds per-output ICC profile support, FP16 color management by default for color-managed displays, improved trackpad scrolling gestures, new options for moving windows between groups, and several breaking configuration changes worth reading through before you update. I genuinely believe Hyprland is the most interesting desktop project in the Linux world over the last 10 years. On a laptop with a keyboard, I do not think there is a more powerful or more coherent alternative for the way a technical user actually works. Those who are too attached to the mouse will need time to adapt, but that does not change the technical quality of what this project has built. That said, Hyprland is still deeply bleeding edge, and this move to Lua confirms it. This is not consolidated software, it is a construction site moving fast. I learned that the hard way. I tried to build it, I went as far as patching GCC, and then I gave up. I'm telling you this so you understand what we're actually talking about. The technical mismatch between Void Linux and Hyprland is not accidental, it is almost genetic. Void is stability, minimalism, no dependency pulled in without a serious reason. Hyprland is libraries at their latest version, dependencies that grow with every release, an ecosystem that moves fast and waits for no one. From that technical incompatibility, a political tension was born that could have been avoided, and instead made the whole affair noisier and more dramatic than it needed to be. And here we arrive at the story that struck me most this week. Not for its technical urgency, but for what it makes you think about. A Ubuntu community contributor who also works on the Yaru theme and on Vanilla OS published a video of a personal experiment, rebuilding the Unity shell using Wayfire as a Wayland compositor, GTK4 layer shell, and libadwaita for the widgets. The result is immediately recognizable. The vertical launcher, the top panel, the dash, that feeling of a unified and coherent system. It is not a fork, not an official project. It has no public repository and no organized community behind it. It is code written over a weekend. And yet, just watching it makes you ask, what would Unity have been in 2026 if Canonical had not walked away? Before answering that, it is worth remembering what Unity actually was technically. It was not a desktop environment in the traditional sense. It was literally a plugin for comps the X11 compositor Canonical had adopted and placed at the center of its graphical architecture. Comps used OpenGL for accelerated rendering, and Unity lived on top of it as a layer. It was an audacious choice and not without problems. On hardware without decent OpenGL support, the system was slow or simply would not start. Canonical also maintained an alternative version, Unity 2D, written in QML, which used Metacity as the window manager for systems that could not run the 3D version. The last Ubuntu to use comps with Unity was 16.04. Then came the surrender. I found Unity radical in the best sense of the word. More radical than GNOME Shell, which was changing the rules of the desktop at the same time, but with a different aesthetic. Canonical had a team of professional designers, ran regular user testing sessions, and had iterated on the project for years with a consistency that is rare in Linux. The result was an end-to-end system, from window management to system indicators, from global search to menu behavior, everything answered to a common logic. When Unity debuted as a desktop shell in Ubuntu 11.04, the Linux world was in full identity crisis. GNOME was abandoning GNOME 2 for GNOME Shell. Cinnamon was being born as a reaction. In that moment, Canonical was asking users to make a further leap toward Unity. My reading is that the choice was actually forced. Moving from GNOME 2 to GNOME 3 and then to Unity in rapid succession would have been an incoherence disaster. Better to make the big leap in one go with your own shell. The problem is that Unity was not ready. It was not stable enough, it was not performant enough on modest hardware given the weight of comps, and above all, it was not explained well enough. Canonical presented it as a fait accompli, not as a proposal. The criticisms Unity received in those years were real. The fixed left-side launcher could not be moved or resized, and on non-widescreen monitors it became a genuine problem. The Amazon search integrated into the dash starting with Ubuntu 12.10 was a commercially motivated decision that was communicated so badly it damaged the project's reputation far out of proportion to its actual technical impact. And above all, Unity was Canonical's desktop, not the community's, open source in its license, but closed in its decisions. There was no way to influence the direction of the project unless you were inside Canonical. But watching that video, all of that feels distant. Unity had something that GNOME has partly abandoned in its pursuit of absolute simplicity, and that KDE has never really had because its strength is configurability, a system logic, and end-to-end coherence. Everything answered to an internal consistency built by professionals with years of research behind them. What hurts most is that Canonical abandoned Unity in 2017, precisely when the project had finally reached serious maturity. It was stable, it was coherent, it made sense. And if it had not been for the black hole of the smartphone ambition, Ubuntu would probably still have its own shell today, in a modern form, on Wayland. Something very close to what was built over a weekend by a contributor in his spare time. But there is a further reading I want to put on the table. Canonical did not just lose Unity, it lost sight of the grammar of its own success. Ubuntu became relevant because it spoke to users at their level. It understood the fears, the needs, the ambitions of people approaching Linux for the first time. That was its disruptive force in the distribution landscape. With Unity, in its communication choices and its design choices, it broke exactly that grammar. It stopped asking and started imposing. And in an ecosystem like Linux, where you have no shareholders to satisfy, no market share to defend, no sale to close, where in the end it is people who decide what to use, breaking that grammar is devastating. Ubuntu missed an opportunity, perhaps the greatest in its history. But here's a provocation worth sitting with. What if Canonical decided to bet on Unity again, right now? It sounds absurd at first, but think about it for a moment. GNOME keeps releasing version after version while ossifying around the same paradigm, the same decisions, the same philosophy of stripping things away in the name of simplicity. There is no revolution coming from that direction. GNOME will look in 10 or 15 years essentially the way it looks today, with minor refinements around the edges. That is not a criticism, it is just what GNOME is at this point. A mature project that has found its form and is not interested in questioning it. And in that landscape, a Canonical that decided to resurrect Unity, built from scratch on Wayland, with modern tooling, with the design maturity the company has accumulated over 2 decades, would not be a nostalgic exercise. It would be a genuine disruption. The concept is still valid. The logic of a unified, coherent, end-to-end system has not been superseded by anything in the Linux desktop world. Nobody else is doing it. GNOME abandoned it in pursuit of minimalism. KDE never attempted it because its identity is configurability. The space is empty. With Canonical, you can expect anything, and not everything it does is necessarily negative in spite of what its track record might suggest. Snap exists, but so does the Ubuntu desktop that millions of people use as their first Linux experience. The capacity is there, the design culture is there. The question is whether the will is there, and whether anyone inside that company is looking at that weekend video and thinking what I am thinking. Maybe not, but I would not rule it out entirely. A quick note before I close, something I mentioned at the start of the year and that I want to address properly now. I'm going to reduce the volume of videos on this channel. I simply cannot keep publishing at the pace I have been. Every hour of free time I have goes into this, and I want to start dedicating some of that time to other projects I have been building toward for a while. I think it is worth being transparent about what making a video actually involves, because from the outside it can look deceptively simple. Some videos take hours, yes, but others, the ones that go deep into history, into architecture, into the political and cultural dynamics of this ecosystem, those can take months. I have been working for a long time on a video about Linux security, another one on Arch. These are not things you sit down and write in an afternoon. The research, the structure, the verification, the writing, all of that is invisible to you when you press play, but it is there and it is substantial. So starting now, the rhythm will be 2 videos a week plus source code and Sunday. Less quantity, same commitment. If anything, more of it. This week the kernel was on fire. GitHub was showing cracks, Hyprland was growing up, and someone was rebuilding a ghost over the weekend. A normal week in 2026. See you in the next video. And as always, may Linux be with you.